Donald Rumsfeld was both the youngest Secretary of Defense when he served under President Gerald Ford and the oldest Secretary of Defense when he served under President George W. Bush. During the Bush era, he saw this country enter not one war but two. His 6-year run under President Bush was plagued by controversy. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the detainees at Guantanamo Bay prison, the atrocities at Abu Ghraib, and the torture of foreign combatants. But is America stronger and safer today because of these actions? I don't think so. But joining me now is someone who does, the man himself, former Secretary of Defense and author of his new memoir, which as we speak is #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, Known and Unknown. Donald Rumsfeld. Mr. Secretary, it's a pleasure. Welcome here.
Judge, thank you. It's good to be with you.
I want to talk a little bit about what's going on as we speak before we get into your book and the history of those years when you ran the Defense Department. Do the people in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya have the right to revolt against the dictatorial regimes that have oppressed them for years?
I was President Reagan's Middle East envoy, and I spent a lot of time in that region, and I talk about it in the book. And the short answer is yes. I mean, the natural state of man is to be free. And there's an old saying that there'll be no peace in the world until every man is free, because to every man he is the world.
Right.
And those people, they've got Twitter and Facebook and 24-hour news and television, and they look around the world and they see opportunities, other people having opportunities. And where is that happening? It's happening in countries with free political systems,
right,
and free economic systems, and that's what's going on.
Are the people in Afghanistan and Iraq free to demonstrate against and depose the regimes that we helped install there?
Well, sure. I mean, it's a free country. They can go demonstrate, do whatever they want. They've got free speech. They've got free television, free press.
Are they free to overthrow those regimes?
Well, in a democratic way, they've got a constitution, and they should adhere to the constitution.
Who was in charge of what was happening on the ground in Iraq after the invasion? Was it Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, or was it some civilian, not too clear to whom he reported?
Well, in the first instance, it was the combatant commander, and then followed by that, there was Jay Garner with Reconstruction Office, and following that, there was the Coalition Provisional Authority with Jerry Bremer.
What was the problem with Bremer?
He did a lot good. I mean, he first of all, he was willing to go over there and do that job, and a lot good was accomplished. I mean, if you think about it, the schools were working, they had new textbooks, the stock market was working, people were functioning.
Did he answer to you?
Not really.
To whom did he answer?
Well, he considered himself a presidential envoy, which he was, and therefore he answered to the president, supposedly. He was supposedly reporting through me, but it didn't work quite that way. He was able to report very much to the president and to the National Security Council.
Before we get any deeper into Iraq, you reminded me of what you did in the Reagan administration. Did you sell or cause to come into the possession of Saddam Hussein weapons of mass destruction?
Did the United States sell to him? Absolutely not. Well, where would anyone think that? I've never heard that.
Did you cause him to come into the possession of chemical weapons?
Of course not. He'd already used chemical weapons against his own people and against the Iranians. He was in a war with Iran at the time.
Where did he get them?
He developed them. Iraq's a modernized country. They have a high educated population. It's a big country. And he had used chemical weapons against the Iranians, his enemy, that he was in a war with, when I arrived over there. And our government had repeatedly urged him not to use chemical weapons.
At the time he was using those chemical weapons, we had a friendly relationship with him. There's a picture of you shaking his hand.
Well, I was meeting him. We didn't have a friendly relations. We hadn't had diplomatic relations with Iraq since the Middle East War. You're quite wrong. Let me explain something. What happened was President Reagan, George Shultz, and I talked. And we said, look, the enemy of our enemy should be our friend. And we were crossways with both Iran and Iraq.
Understood.
And Iran, if you remember, had taken our embassy hostage. So
of course
they said, let's go see if we can establish diplomatic relations
Are
with
we
them.
safer today in New York City and Chicago and Los Angeles because we invaded Iraq and deposed Saddam Hussein?
Absolutely.
How?
First of all, there was a country that had violated and refused to cooperate with 17 UN resolutions. It had been on the...
Well, that doesn't justify invasion.
I didn't say it did. It had been on the State Department's terrorist list for years. They were shooting at our aircraft every day, 2,000 times in the northern and southern no-fly zones. He was giving $25,000 to suicide bombers' families.
Why
after
were our
they'd blown
aircraft
up.
even there to be targets?
Because the UN had established the northern and southern no-fly zone, and he'd gone in and killed hundreds of thousands of his own people.
All right, but you agree he had nothing to do with 9/11 and posed no immediate threat to the mainland of the United States. He didn't even pose a remote threat to the mainland of the United States.
Well, the president made a judgment that the intelligence was persuasive, and everyone who looked at it believed it was persuasive.
But we now know it was erroneous.
Just a minute. The Democrats, Republicans in the Congress looked at the same intelligence. They voted overwhelmingly.
Did you look at that intelligence?
You bet. So did Colin Powell, and Colin Powell made the speech at the United Nations after studying it carefully.
Did you authorize torture on people who were held in remote sites by the military or the Central Intelligence Agency?
I had nothing to do with the Central Intelligence Agency, and the short answer with respect to the Defense Department, the answer is no.
Would you have
Just a minute. The President required that people be treated humanely. I reissued that order that they be treated humanely.
All right,
just a minute.
We disagree on the word torture. But did you authorize waterboarding?
No. Guess how many people we waterboarded at Guantanamo?
I'm not talking about Guantanamo.
Anywhere
I'm talking about foreign countries where we sent people for that purpose.
Guess how many people that waterboarded?
What do you say the number is, Mr. Secretary?
It's zero. It never happened. It's myth.
Well, that is contradicted by a great deal of evidence, including evidence that's been admitted in court.
Not, Judge. You have to redefine evidence.
Would you have opened up Guantanamo
Bay again? No, we've got to settle this. We've got to settle this. This is important.
You're talking about the military never used.
That's what I said.
All right. The evidence is the CIA. You're correct on that.
How many did the CIA waterboard?
Well, they waterboarded one guy over 100 times. I know that. They've admitted to that.
They waterboarded 3 people.
Don't you think it's torture?
Look, you're the lawyer. You're the judge. All I know is the president approved it. The Department of Justice said it was not torture, and it was legal. Just a minute. And the CIA ought not to be condemned for doing what the president authorized and what the Justice Department approved.
Should we give up our freedoms in order to be safer?
Well, look, there's no short answer to that. You know that. What we have to do is, to the extent any time we infringe on our freedoms, we have to be very careful about it, and we have to have a darn good reason for our security. I mean, Abraham Lincoln imposed martial law.
And Abraham Lincoln's imposition of martial law and suspension of the writ of habeas corpus was invalidated by the Supreme Court after Lincoln died.
I understand. But the answer is, if to the extent we ever do infringe on our freedoms, we ought to do it in a way that we understand it, with public debate. We ought to have a review of it periodically, and we ought to be darn careful about it.
But you took an oath to uphold the Constitution.
I did.
You don't want us to infringe our freedoms at any time.
I don't.
All right. Was the war in Iraq a just war, as you understand just war to be?
Yes.
How so? I mean, he hadn't attacked us. We used more force than was necessary, and thousands of innocents were killed in the process.
We did not use more force than was necessary.
We did not use more force than was necessary.
No.
How is it that 2 million Iraqis fled and at least 650,000 were killed?
Any time there's a war, there are refugees, and they leave. There's no question. That's not unusual. Once the president made a decision that our country's safety required that the regime be changed. And you should remember, back in the 1990s, in the Clinton administration, the Congress, Republican and Democrat, had voted overwhelmingly for regime change.
I understand, but you did say earlier that the country was in no danger from Saddam Hussein. It was remote.
No, I didn't. I said that he was not involved with 9/11.
Right, but you also said he was only shooting some planes over there. He wasn't a danger to New York or Miami or Chicago.
Oh, I see your point. Yeah, he was shooting at our planes 2,000 times.
Right. 10,000 miles away.
Yes.
Was that a reason to invade the country?
No.
With all the damage that accompanied?
The reason to invade the country are the ones that the president laid out before the Congress, and the Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor of.
And those reasons were regime change?
There were multiple reasons.
Can the United States pick any dictator around the world and decide it's time to take him out and use military force to do so?
You would have to make a judgment. The president would have to make a judgment. That's who decides these things. That there was a risk to the United States in one way or another to do that. You cannot. Today the weapons are so lethal today.
Right.
That to the extent you make a judgment that the lethality of the weapons are such and the questions are such that you have to act before they attack you, that's a tough decision.
Would you invade Iraq the same way, in the same manner today, if confronted with similar circumstances?
I'll say 2 things. One, I think that the president made the right decision based on what information he had. No one disagreed with him. I did not. Colin Powell did not. Condi Rice did not. The Vice President did not. What we know today benefits us going forward. It does not benefit us going back.
Well, let me ask it differently, and we're just nearing the end of our time. Would you have invaded Iraq had you known that there were no weapons of mass destruction in his possession?
Well, first of all, the Dulfer report says that, in fact, he had weapons of mass destruction.
But he didn't have them at the time of the invasion.
Well, he did. He had the people in place. He had the precursors. He had the facilities for dual use, and he could have very rapidly, within a matter of weeks, developed the chemical and biological weapons. That is what the official report said by Mr. Dulfer.
Secretary Rumsfeld, my fellow Princetonian, it's a pleasure. Congratulations on this book. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you.